I have to click, got it.
All right. I thank you. We are here with Ron Wikso of Steve Miller Band and many others. Masters Radio is a online community serving the masters who brought us music more than 20 years ago and are still bringing great music to us today. It is a treat to have Ron on the line with us today because he has worked with a number of these masters, including the Steve Miller Band most recently, and we're delighted to have a conversation with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So you're quite welcome. So you were just up in our neighborhood in Washington, D.C. not too long ago.
Yeah, Wolf Trap.
Yeah, we love that place. In fact, the guitar player in my band was there for the show. He said it was a great show.
Oh, good. I'm
Steve Miller
sorry
Band
about the
for-
the last minute thing. I couldn't really hook anything up.
No, that's quite all right. Yeah, it's we'll get you next time if we can. The
Okay.
list of people that you have played with is amazing. Obviously, Steve Miller Band now since, as I understand it, like 2021.
Yeah, it's just about 2 years now. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. But Foreigner, Share, there's just so many others that I really wanted to get. One of the handles is tell me a little bit about the differences between doing what clearly I'm guessing that's session work as opposed to tour work with all those people, but it may have been both, and doing a tour with say Steve Miller.
Well, it's a little bit of both with all those bands. The main differences are there's some stylistic differences, in the music. I mean, the David Lee Roth Band isn't anything like the Steve Miller Band, really. They're both rock bands, but it's a different approach. Same with Foreigner. Foreigner's probably closer to Steve. And Cher, her whole thing was, it was like a big production. She had dancers and all that kind of stuff. So the approach is a little bit different for each band, but still it's all music. And I come from a background where I had a teacher when I was young who kind of encouraged me to listen to lots of different types of music and kind of try to understand it. And so I've been fortunate to have played everything from jazz stuff to country stuff. And probably most of my work has probably been in rock, classic rock, pop, that type of stuff. But I've done a lot of other stuff. So it keeps it interesting. And you have to learn to adapt to each situation that you find yourself in. And fortunately for me, some of that, because I kind of can do some of the different things, it's enabled me to keep working.
There is that, yeah. I mean, but I think your skill set would probably carry you through there. Are you finding there's ever situations where you might be, well, you mentioned David Lee Roth versus the Miller Band, or something that you saw in David's band, you thought, wow, we should try that here. I mean, is that sort of cross pollination, or are things a little bit too regimented for that by the time you get involved with them?
Every band has its own dynamic. This is in Steve's band. It's Steve's band. We do basically what he really wants us to do, and not that we don't have our own input or anything. When I first got in the band, in fact, Steve told me to make it my own. Like he told me, don't worry about whatever Gordy, the previous drummer, had been doing. And Gordy is an amazing drummer. He's been with Steve for 33 years before I got in the band. So Steve was probably fairly used to the way Gordy approached it. So I didn't want to get too far off of that path, because I didn't want it to startle them or anything. And there are certain things with any music that you play that you have to kind of you have to play it a certain way. Like I remember, like when I was in Foreigner, certain fills, like when you play Double Vision, there's a certain drum fill in that song. If you don't play it, it's not right. So there's that element to things too. I just take each situation and I try to see what whoever, like in this case Steve, or when I was in Dave's band of Dave, or in Foreigner it was Mick and Lou, try to see what they want, what they're looking for, and just try to give it to them the best I can,
I appreciate that answer. Yeah, it's what I would have thought. It's all about the music, all about of course, getting the band to work with it, and very giving of those guys to say, understand where we came before, as you have to, and like I said, some of those fills that the singer may depend upon to know that's where you're supposed to come in, for example.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be buried in the legacy of whoever was there before you. Good.
Yeah.
I read somewhere. Go ahead.
I do write, like when I learn these songs, I write everything down. I have like a system to chart things out. I don't write it note for note specifically every bar, but I do try to capture whatever I think is most important and then work off of that.
Oh yeah. And you got to be able to write it down, otherwise you're not going to be able to repeat it over and over again. So I read
Yeah.
you're trained at Berkeley, so I get it.
I went to Berkeley for 1 year, 2 semesters.
Okay.
I was 17 when I went there.
So it's good to get in there and then get out still with some good rock and not sound like a clock. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
One
of the guys I played with in Foreigner was I met at Berkeley, Tom Gimbel. Yeah, we both entered Berkeley when we were 17, and then years later we found ourselves playing together in Foreigner.
Yeah, that's well. I mean, it's got a long and storied tradition of providing some great musicians.
Yeah.
I read somewhere that you were on a cruise ship for a while, cruise ship band.
Yeah, when I was let's see well, the main one that I did was I was probably 21, I think. It was the fall of 81 and into the early part of the January or so of 82. And I was living in New York, and I had an opportunity to play on a cruise ship that I was in the house band. It was like a big band type of thing, playing show music and stuff. And we we went to like 10 or 12 islands down the Caribbean and Venezuela, So it was cool, and it was warm, So I got out of the New York winter, but when I went back to New York, it was like, -20 or some crazy thing, And so I wound up moving to LA a few months after that. And then I did do a cruise when I was in LA for just 2 weeks. I was subbing for somebody down to Mexico. And then when I was in the Greg Raleigh band, we played on a cruise ship that was like one of those rock cruises, or rock jazz type cruises. And, there was a bunch of other great musicians on there. Tom Scott was on there, and Robin Ford, and just a bunch of great musicians like that. Harvey Mason, Nathan East, Neil Steubenhouse, all these great players were on this gig with different bands playing. I think Michael McDonald played, and I can't remember all of them, but it was one of those, rock cruise type things, or music cruise, whatever, That was fun.
Yeah, but that generation that grew up listening to that music originally is of the same age now as the cruise ship demographic, typically.
Yeah, right.
So it makes a lot of sense.
There's a lot of those things that go out now.
Yeah. Musicians either love cruise work or they hate it. But it's
yeah, there's some, like anything, there's good and bad to it. If you're susceptible to getting seasick, then it's not so great.
That is true.
And it can be confining, when you're out at sea, that's it. You're on the ship, nowhere to go but a different deck,
That's right. Although some of those ships nowadays are so large, you might never get to every end of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you do recording studio work as well. We were talking about that before we signed on here. Tell me a little bit about some of the artists that you're helping out or would like to help out with your work there.
Well, I do. I've done studio work for many years. Back when I was living in LA and everything. But back in about 1998 or so, I put together a studio at home, and I started. I found a recording system called T.16. At the time, it was the only computer-based recording system that would where you were able to record a lot of tracks at once. I was able to do 16 tracks at once, which I think that's where they got that name, T.16. So I set it up to where I could record. I set up a drum set and had the mics all set up, and I could record like you would in a big studio, where all the microphones were their own track, so I'd had a microphone inside the kick and outside the kick, and then on each drum and the overheads and the room mics and all that. And so I started doing that back then. And it was sort of like there were a lot of people who were getting home studios at that time, and of course now it's exploded. But the one thing they couldn't do was live drums. So I thought, well, maybe I could do that and help people out, because the only alternative to doing live drums was to go to a big expensive studio and pay for an engineer and all that. So, it was a thing to do. And so I was able to offer these drum tracks fairly inexpensively and send them the files that they could then mix themselves, however they like. And in the beginning, I was doing it using, CD-ROMs, sending them back and forth in the mail to people. And in fact, it was so early. One of the guys that I became really good friends with, but I did some tracks for, he was from Wisconsin at the time, and I was living in LA. And he sent me an email and said, hey, would you be interested in doing these tracks for me, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, sure, no problem. And I asked him, I said, well, how did you find me? And he said, I Googled you. And I said, what's Google? That's how long ago this was. This is before Google became a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that just sort of kept on happening, and get referrals or whatever. So I still do that, but except now I don't have to use CD-ROMs or DVDs. I just send them, using Dropbox or WeTransfer, one of those systems where people send me the files for the songs. I set them up in my computer. I do the drums, and then I send them back the individual drum tracks. And it's a win-win for everybody. I can do it, here at my studio. I don't have to travel around to another studio and do all the setup and all that stuff. And they get, studio quality drum tracks for a reasonable price. I just did, and I've done quite a few of them right before the recent touring started with Steve. Before I played at Wolf Trap, I did 16 tracks for a guy. The producer is in Italy, and the guy who's the singer is in Canada. So everybody's like all over the place. I was told that Leland Sklar is going to play on that stuff. I assume that's what's happening, but I haven't heard it since I did the drums. But I'm sure they've got a lot of work still to do on it. But yeah, so I do a lot of that stuff whenever I'm around and people are interested. And like anything else, it's up and down. Sometimes I'm really busy with it, and sometimes not so much.
Understood. Yeah. So you've been doing it even before the pandemic, when most of us learned in the pandemic how to collaborate online.
Oh yeah, I've been doing it.
The drummer was in Tokyo. The lyricist and one singer was in Seattle. We had a guitar player in Thailand. But yeah, it's amazing how it all comes together. Of the pandemic, you just told me one of those lessons I've been asking artists. Because that's just really a redefining moment in all of our lives in so many ways. What things they took with them. You actually were already doing this sort of remote recording, so to speak, before it ever happened. What other lessons from the pandemic are you taking with you now that it's safe to go outside again and safe to get back in the way?
Well, I think it makes you realize how much you miss the things that you love to do, like playing concerts, or if you're a fan, going to concerts, and even just going out to dinner with your friends, things like that. It's I think that's a big wake-up call. I don't know, I don't know what to think of that whole situation. It was so bizarre and so unreal in so many ways. I don't know. Just to be stuck at home. It was. I think for a lot of people, it was probably very depressing. And I know for some people that when we finally were able to start going out and playing again, people were just like jumping for joy, like, oh my God, this is so great, and I still feel that way. I'm feel very lucky and blessed to be able to go out and do what we do and have people come and see it, and it's, I'm very grateful.
it shows. And speaking of those fans, when you're out there with, obviously the audience for Steve Miller Band could go back 50 years. Are you seeing a wide range of ages, or some tend
Oh
to be
yeah.
sort of our age folks?
Yeah, I think a lot of people who grew up with the music bring their kids or maybe even their grandkids, and we see a very wide range of people in the audience and a lot of younger people who, know all the words and all that stuff. Yeah, I think, the thing about Steve's music and, people like that is some of their music is sort of timeless. It's not necessarily of a specific era like some music is, like disco is, was that time or, Steve's music, I think is and it actually goes back longer than 50 years. We play some songs that are from the 60s, 66,
Yeah,
67 or something. This year, in fact, is the 50th anniversary of the Joker.
right.
Um, so, but yeah, it's just remained kind of, I think, part of the culture, part of, it's the soundtrack of a lot of people's lives, right?
It's what we do say all the time. Yeah, I mean, songs like Jet Airliner or the 707, notwithstanding, I'm not sure a whole lot of 20
Yeah,
somethings know what a 707 was. But apart from that, the very idea of it,
yeah,
the core of the song, that doesn't matter. No, you're absolutely right.
yeah.
Songs are timeless. So, how would you say for somebody who's, you've got this perspective of decades of drumming, somebody who wants to get into this business, what would be, I read some of the things you've said in other interviews, but I'd like to hear you sort of say about what you've seen in terms of how the music business is now, how it maybe used to be. What would you advise somebody who wants to get into a band like Steve Miller Band somewhere in the future, or have their own band be that way, the Masters tomorrow?
Well, I, it's hard to say. The music business has changed so much. It's not like getting a record deal is necessarily even the thing to do. In fact, now to get a record deal, you kind of have to prove that you can sell records before you get the deal. It's sort of all turned around. Like record companies don't want to sign you unless you've already sold 50,000 records. And if you can sell 50,000 records, what do you need a record company for?
That's right. Yeah, I know.
Because you make way more per record when you're doing it yourself than than the record company would give you. So, but beyond that, just as a musician, as a player, I think the main thing is to uh, develop your abilities as best you can, but be true to the music and you know, I think you have to want to do the music for the sake of the music more than you want to do it for the sake of the fame or the notoriety or any of that kind of stuff. Um, I don't consider myself at all famous. I just, I'm a guy who's been very lucky to have played with a lot of famous people. But I play music because I love to play music. I don't know what I'd do otherwise. And I don't know, I see people that, want to go on, not that it's bad, but they go on these TV shows or whatever. And sometimes I wonder if they're really doing it because they love the music or they think they can get famous or rich out of it. The music business is not for the faint of heart. It's a difficult business. And I'm always grateful when, anybody says, "Hey, you sounded great," or "I love your song," or "I love your," whatever it is. I have a project with my girlfriend Marcy, and we make music that's much different than the stuff that I do with Steve, or it's more like healing, comforting type of music. And we whenever we get a reaction from somebody that says, "Oh my God, this music was just what I needed to hear," I was going through a rough time or whatever, it's really uplifting. And anybody who wants to check that out, by the way, it's Marcy Requist, and it's MarcyRequist.com. And she's a great singer. We have amazing musicians on her recordings. And that's another thing. I love getting to play with other great musicians. That is a really great feeling to me. In Steve's band and some of the other bands I've been in and on Marcy's music, I've been very fortunate to play with some of the best players in the world. And that makes making music a lot more fun when you're playing with other people who are really creative, and they're really putting their heart and soul into whatever it is you do. It's It shows. I think when you do that, it comes out. We used to have a lot of people when I played in the Greg Raleigh band and also in Steve's band. They'll come up and say, "You guys look like you're having so much fun," and it's because we are. We do enjoy it. It's not accidental that comes across. And if you're struggling to make the music, then I think that comes across. If it's not sincere, then I think people can tell.
I would agree. Yeah, there's certainly art that is born of angst. I think Rick Rubin said you can get a great song by gritting your teeth or by smiling, but smiling is much more fun.
Yeah.
So you can get it, but I understand that you certainly can't sustain it unless it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you say in this global internet kind of situation, and particularly with, again, some of the lessons we learned from the pandemic, that it's necessary any longer to be in a hub like LA or like New York, maybe having spent time in both, to get access to those kinds of musicians? Or do you think no matter where you are, if you're putting out the right stuff, people will find you?
Well, speaking of from my own experience, I don't live in one of those hubs anymore. I did for a very long time. I grew up in New York, and I went to school in Boston for a year, and then I worked in New York and all that. And then I moved to LA, and I was there for 23 years. And then I went to Austin, Texas, and I was there for 15 years. And that's less of a hub than LA, for example. But now I live out in the middle of nowhere. Mainly, I can do these tracks for people. Doesn't matter where I am. I have my studio here. They send me the tracks. If they want me to fly somewhere, I can do that. I did that actually earlier this year. I did went out to LA and recorded 12 songs in one day. Myself and the bass player Matt Bissonette, who's an amazing bass player. He plays with Elton John, and we did 12 songs for a guy in one day, which was sort of crazy, but we managed to get it in.
Had you worked with Matt before?
Oh yeah, I've known Matt since the early '80s. Yeah, he's a great guy.
Because drummer and bass, if they can get in lockstep, there's just nothing like it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's, it wouldn't matter who's playing drums. And of course, he grew up playing with Greg, his brother, so he's just great to play with. And he's on all the stuff I do with Marcy as well.
Oh, no. Okay.
Yeah, and the keyboard player is a guy named Wally Minko, who's amazing. He plays with Jean-Luc Ponty and Arturo Sandoval and Pink and Tony Braxton and just a million people. And anyway, it's great musicians on that stuff. So getting back to your question, though, it depends on what you're doing. For certain things, it probably does matter to be in one of those places. But for what I'm doing, and for the with the fact that I've kind of been doing it for a while, and most of the people I know don't care where I live, like Steve's band, everybody lives in a different place. Steve's in New York, and keyboard player's in Nashville, the bass player lives in California, and the guitar player lives in Texas. So, we're all over the place. It really doesn't matter if any of us are in one specific location. We just fly to where we're working, and then we're together, And that was the case in the Greg Raleigh band too. A bunch of us lived in different places, and same when I worked with the Creedence guys. It's all, I'm not too far from an airport, so that's the main thing.
Yeah, and out there in the middle of nowhere, no one complains about drums. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, it's a really great place where I'm at right now. I don't mean for it to sound like it's the middle of nowhere, but I'm just trying to not give you the exact location.
That's quite all right. No, we're fine with that. No, you may remain incognito, sir. Yeah. Excellent. Well, it has been a treat chatting with you. Marcy's music, being as it's made with all those players that were in fact masters, we can promote that. We tell people we have a rule: you have to be at least 20 years into your original hit. So we don't have any Taylor Swift music on Masters Radio because she
Oh,
didn't
okay.
qualify yet, you know. So, but with the Bissonette brothers and with the folks that you've mentioned, we'd be delighted to promote that. I mean, it sounds like it can do people real good.
Oh
So
yeah,
we'll have
it's
to have a
really,
conversation
I
about
think
that.
it's really wonderful. Marcy's a great singer. She had never had an opportunity to do any of this kind of stuff before. But with Wally and Matt and the guitar player is a guy named Kurt Griffey, who I work with in Creedence, and Greg Raleigh's
Hmm.
band, and Eddie Money, and we use a sax player named Tom Evans, who plays with the Eagles, and just lots of other people, Carly Simon, Rod Stewart, just a bunch of people. So it's high quality musicianship, and the music, I think is very, it's comforting for people. The idea is for it to be music that's comforting to somebody who maybe is going through something or whatever, and that's what we try to do. It's much different, like I said, than going to a Steve Miller show or whatever, but it's really well done, I think, and she sings great, and all the musicians are great, so hopefully people like it.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like it does some great stuff. It's that group, that cohort that we put Masters together for, because a lot of them, if they are working, they're not working at the same level they used to be, and in many cases they couldn't get things like good health care, they couldn't get good benefits and the like. And we put that all into our member artist program at Masters Radio, so that they can be like a union or like a large employer. They can have that level of benefits available to them. And it
Wow.
really depends. And we started it because people were not able to find the kind of music these people were putting out. They didn't know. I didn't know there was a new Russ Ballard song out 2 years ago. Russ Ballard's
Oh
been
wow.
a hero of mine for decades, but it's not going to get played on Spotify. It's a fair and serious, I say.
Yeah.
To their credit, they play what people want to hear, and that's fine. But there needs to be some place where, should a new Steve Miller Band album come out, it was what, a decade or so since the last one.
We're actually going in
That's
the
fine.
studio at the end of this next run. I don't know
Ooh,
what we're
that's good
recording
news.
yet.
All right. Well, I'm going to say we save the best for last, but I always ask: is there something you want either your fans or Steve Miller Band's fans to know? Like I said, 50 to 60 million people are going to be getting to show this. What did we forget to talk about today that's important to your fans to hear?
I don't know. Just keep listening to the music. Keep without the fans, is we don't. I'm working at 7-Eleven or something. So it's I just really appreciate their support and whatever I'm doing. Whether it's Marcy's stuff or Steve's stuff or whoever I'm playing with. It's always great to hear the feedback, and hopefully it's positive feedback, and knock on wood, it usually is fairly decent. And yeah, I'm just really grateful for all the opportunities I've had, and everybody that's been a part of it.
Thanks for sharing that. It's no surprise Billy Sheehan said the same thing. He was pointed behind him, said, "Everything's here, everything I have, fans."
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Yeah, I
boils
mean,
down to that.
there is nothing, there's nothing worse than, if you go to a gig and nobody shows up, right?
That's right.
That just doesn't work.
No, no, you don't
I
get
have a
many of those,
funny
thankfully.
story.
Sure,
If you have a second, there's a
of
funny story
course.
I read the other day, and I'll be paraphrasing, but this is a good lesson, I think, for some musicians. There's a
Please.
band called Rusted Root, whose music I
Hmm.
don't know really, uh, but I read this thing online about they were doing a gig. This is like, I guess, the early '90s or something, and it was in Noblesville, Indiana, and they were from Pennsylvania, I think, and so they're venturing out of their home state, and they showed up to this gig, and it was in like a parking lot, and nobody came. There was nobody at the gig, and they were like bummed out, and they asked the promoter, "Are you sure we're in the right place or whatever?" And uh, anyway, they made the decision, a good decision, to play the gig like it was the last time they'd ever get to play together. And during the gig, they saw a woman walking her dog in the parking lot. And if you know where Noblesville is, there's a big amphitheater there, which I've played there with a number of different bands. Um, So this woman is walking through the parking lot and, stopped to watch the band. They hope she didn't leave. And at the end of it, they get done and they come up the stairs and they walk down, and this woman says, "That was the weirdest and coolest thing I ever saw." And that woman was Sheryl Crow.
Yeah.
And they said that she offered them the chance to open for her on some gigs. I don't know. I read this online. Who knows? Maybe it's not even true. But even if it isn't true, it's a great story and it's a good lesson. Always do your best wherever you are, whatever you're doing.
Rick Rubin he said the audience comes last, and that would have been because you have to be true to the art, right? And you
Yeah.
have to be true to your
Yeah.
bandmates. You have to deliver, like as you said, it's going to be the last time you ever play together. You do that,
Yeah.
the fans will take care of themselves, is what I think Rubin meant. But,
Right. Yeah. You have to obviously, she was more than just a common fan, I guess, but they impressed her, assuming
Yeah.
it's a true story.
Right.
and
Right.
and theoretically, if there had been an audience there, they would have done the same thing with the audience. You put that out there, and people respond, hopefully, usually.
Absolutely true. We play them. I'm going to try to reach out to them, find out if that story is true, and I'll let you know.
Okay, yeah, let me know.
So
It's a
we
great
have had,
story either way.
It is. It's a great story either way. Exactly. Yeah. So we have had the pleasure of chatting with Ron Wikso of Steve Miller Band and many others, a drummer, a recording engineer, and contributed to say Marcy's last name again for me, please.
Marcy Request.
Request. Okay, Marcy Request, who sounds like she's been doing some fantastic stuff with music for comfort and healing, and it has been a treat. I thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.